All right, here we're looking at section 1.6, and our big question is how can you describe angle pair relationships and use these descriptions to find some angle measures? Because often we're given one angle and we need to find several others, so these are really going to help us. So here's our learning targets for today. First, we're going to identify complementary and supplementary angles and what those two things mean. Then we're going to identify some linear pairs and some vertical angles. So the first thing is our complementary and supplementary angles. The first thing I need to know is that complementary angles are angles that add. So here's my sum of 90 degrees. So they add up to 90 degrees. They can either be next to each other, and see here we have our 90-degree symbol, or they can just be two angles that are kind of nearish each other, but if I add them together, I still get my 90 degrees. So supplementary angles add to 180. Those are the big things here, is just remembering complementary is 90 degrees and supplementary is 180. Okay. So the other thing we're really looking at is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are angles that are touching, that share a side. Okay, so these two angles are adjacent. These two angles are not adjacent because they're very separate and they don't actually touch. So now let's look at this. So in this figure, name a pair of complementary angles, a pair of supplementary angles, and a pair of adjacent angles. Well, so complementary angles, I know, have to equal 90 degrees. So here I see that if I have this 53 degrees and 37 degrees, I have my complementary angles. So I need to write those the correct way. So I've got angle CAB, and angle RST. Those are my complementary angles. So now let's look at supplementary. Supplementary, I know have to equal 180 degrees. So I see I have this 127 and I have this 53. Those two angles, when I add them together, will give me my 180. So again, I have to write them correctly. So I've got angle CAD and angle RST. Those are going to be my supplementary angles. So now we're looking at adjacent angles. Adjacent angles touch. So here, these two angles share that side, so that means they are adjacent angles. So I've got angle CAB and angle CAD are my adjacent angles. Okay. So here's our next example. So angle 1 is a complement of angle 2, and the measure of angle 1 is 62 degrees. Find the measure of angle 2. The first thing I notice is I'm talking complementary angles, and I know complementary angles add or sum to 90 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and start by drawing that out. And I know I'm dealing with two angles, and it doesn't really matter where I draw my middle ray in here. Here we're going to say that the measure of this side is 62 degrees. So I have to find this. Well, in order to do that, I have to take my 90 minus 62, which will give me the measure of this angle, and that is 28 degrees. So now the second part. Angle 3 is a supplement of angle 4. So supplement, I know that I'm dealing with 180 degrees or a straight angle. And here again, I can just draw my extra ray here. So I'm going to say that this angle is 47 degrees, so I have to find what's over here. So I can do my 180 minus 47, which gives me 133. So the supplement is 133 degrees. Here are a few for you to try, kind of similar to the ones we just did. Make sure that you can do these on your own. So now our next example. When viewed from the side, the frame of a ball return net forms a pair of supplementary angles with the ground. Find the measure of the angles. So I see here I've already got the drawing and I see I'm labeled. So I know that these are supplementary angles, so I know that they add together to get 180. So now I can just take the two pieces that I have. So I have 180 equals 4x plus 8, and I add them together, plus x plus 2 equals 180. So now I can simplify and combine like terms. So I see I have 4x, 5x, 8 plus 2 is 10, equals this 180. So now let's solve for this x. So to do that, I subtract my 10 from both sides. So 170 equals 5x. So I see here I'm multiplying, so to undo that multiplying, I divide by 5. So I end up with x equals 5 goes into 17 3 times, There's 2 left over. 5 goes into 20 4 times. So x is 34. I'm not quite done yet. I was asked to find the measure of these angles, so I have to plug this x value in and find the measure of these angles. So let's start here. So I have 34 plus 2 is going to be 36. So the measure of that angle is 36 degrees. So now I can either take 180 minus 36 to find the measure of my angle, or I can substitute my 34 degrees, or my 34 in for x, to find the measure of this angle here. So try this one, it's very similar. Always you want to start by drawing a picture to see what you're looking at. So a couple more angle pairs that we're going to be dealing with a lot, okay, is our linear pair. So a linear pair is when I have 2 angles that make a line, right? And these are supplementary angles, remember, because they add or they sum to 180 degrees, which is the measure of that line. So vertical angles. So vertical angles are across from each other when I have 2 intersecting lines. Okay, so here I see that angle 4 and angle 5 are vertical angles, and angle 3 and angle 6 are vertical angles. So the other cool thing we know is that these angles will equal each other. So the measure of angle 3 will equal the measure of angle 6. And I also know the measure of angle 4 will equal the measure of angle 5. And I know this because they're vertical. So we're going to talk about some of these proofs later on. Okay. So first, this next example, we're going to identify all linear pairs and all the vertical angles in the figure. So first, let's find the linear pairs. So I would go ahead and just draw all of my straight lines, right? So there's one and there's one. So linear pairs would be, one linear pair could be angle 1, angle 2, and angle 3, because all 3 of those form that line. My other linear pair could be angle 2, angle 3, and angle 5, because they form this side. I can also see I have angle 1 and angle 4, and I also have angle 4 and angle 5. These 4 are the different ways I can form those linear pairs. So now let's look at vertical angles. And remember, vertical angles are across from each other when I have 2 lines. So I see that 1 is a vertical angle to 5, and 4 is a vertical angle if I was to add 2 and 3 together. I can do that. So those I know would all be my vertical angles. So our next example. Okay, so 2 angles form a linear pair. So first thing I know, I've got that, and I've got 2 angles, right? So I've cut it in pieces. The measure of one angle is 5 times the measure of the other angle. Find the measure of each angle. Well, I know that this one is going to be 5 times the measure of this small one. Okay, so if the small one is x, the big one's going to be 5x. So now find the measure of each angle. Well, now since I know they form a linear pair, I know they add to 180, so I can go ahead and add them together. So it gives me 6x equals 180. So x then, because I have to divide by 6, equals 30. So that tells me the measure of this angle is 30 degrees. And then if I multiply that times 5, that'll give me the measure of this angle. So what I can also double check is, do these 2 add up to 180? Which 150 and 30 do. So I do know that I'm right. So try these ones, see how you can do on these. So a couple of things that we need to understand when we're looking at these diagrams. There are some things I can say for sure, and some things I cannot conclude, okay? That we can just assume, but we're not going to, because that will get us into trouble later on. So what I can assume is that all of these points are on the same plane. I see that these 2 do form a line. The biggest things that we cannot conclude, okay? I cannot say that AB is congruent to BC. I cannot say that until I'm told that. The other thing I don't know is that DB, E, and EBC are congruent unless I am told that. And I can also not tell that this is a right angle unless I'm specifically told that. So keep in mind, unless you are told these things, you cannot assume them. So now let's look at our learning targets. So first we're going to identify complementary and supplementary angles. Then we looked at linear pairs and vertical angles. And we also talked about what I can and cannot assume based on just the picture that I'm given. So now that we've worked through this, go ahead and work on this homework for this section.